What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are getting this oh so sweet K-tuned valve cover installed on our turbo K24 swap Subaru BRZ. Let's do it. Now, before we jump in and get a detailed look at this thing, make sure to hit that thumbs up down below if you're enjoying this series, and subscribe if you're new here and you want to start following the build. Now, what we have here is the K-tuned K24A2 style valve cover. This thing comes with a bunch of extra features that your stock valve cover does not. Namely, these -10 inserts for the AN fittings so that you can run a proper PCV catch can system. So you've got two fittings on this side, which in my case, because I'm running this as a rear-wheel drive setup, these are on the driver's side of the engine. And as you can see, these two are further apart, and over here on the other side, they are significantly closer together. So whether you're running this in, say, a Civic, an RSX, an Integra with a K-swap, and you're running front-wheel drive, anything like that, they've got you set up if you want to just run a single one of these, or if you want to run two on one side, two on the other. However you want to do it, they've got an option for you. In addition to that, they also have a fitting here on the back side, which I have blocked off, and they actually provide this little plug, but this is the stock location for the PCV relief system, and they not only include a plug, but they also include an actual fitting for it if you want to run that. Now, again, because I'm running this as rear-wheel drive, the back of the firewall is too close to this, so I just have this side plugged. And here is a closer look at some of the plugs that they give you. They give you the plug and the O-ring. So because of the fact that I'm going to be using both of these, I have gone ahead and plugged the other side. And so today, in addition to doing this valve cover, we might as well do some fancy hardware. And for that, we have got the Skunk2 low profile valve cover hardware. Now, this set of hardware, or really this kind of hardware system, works to replace the studs and the bolts that actually screw into the top of your head from stock. And what they do is they replace them, instead of having like a nub, kind of like a nub nut almost, that screws onto the top of a threaded rod. These actually replace those threaded rods with female threaded inserts. Here's an example of one right there. And so instead of threading something onto the top of this, they supply you all of the little bolts that thread down into there. And so your hardware for this will sit very flush, instead of having like a little sort of nub nut that mounts onto the top. But we'll get a closer look at this as we go forward. So normally, if all you're doing is installing this valve cover, the installation is pretty much identical to the stock one. This is my old stock one that I had sort of painted and modified, and I had basically tried to replicate these two fittings here for the catch can, but you know, they technically could work, or potentially would work, but the metal on the outside of this valve cover is just so thin, and the fittings that they provide for this are significantly thicker. Let's see if we can, yeah, so there's so much more thread material on that versus that. So that's just really a lot more confidence inspiring. And also, because of the fact that I was using this when I was putting the engine in and out, it got scratched up, and I could repaint this, I could reuse it, but I figured since we're kind of balling out on this project, we might as well go with the fancy stuff. So normally, if all you're doing is replacing this, you just drop it in and bolt it up how you would. But because of the fact that we're using this Skunk2 hardware, we've got some work to do. For the Skunk2 hardware we're going to be using, we actually need to remove these threaded studs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And we're replacing them with these guys. Very similar in construction. However, instead of having a male threaded end on top, they have a female threaded end, and that is essentially what allows us to get those low cover profile sort of washer systems bolted onto these. And there are actually two different types of these. You have a long one and you have a short one. There's only one of these long ones, and it goes right here on the top timing chain guide. The other 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all going to be replaced with these shorter ones. So the first thing that we need to do is get these pulled out, and I am going to do these essentially one by one. The biggest thing that I'm concerned about is this top guide coming loose and basically my engine losing timing. I don't think it's a huge concern because of the fact that this is just a guide on top. The tensioner down here is keeping the chain taut, so these camshafts shouldn't really have a chance to move at all. But just for my own sort of peace of mind, I'm going to take this one off, replace it. I'm not going to torque it down yet, but I want to get it just sort of finger tight, and then we'll do the rest of these. And for this, you are going to need a deep well 12mm socket to get all of these out. If you don't have a deep socket, you most likely, should be able to just use a 12mm, open end or even a closed end wrench to be able to get these off. But since I've got this guy, that's what we're going to start with. Now that we've got that out, and take a little bit of a closer look here. So these are essentially what we're trying to replace, right? So you've got the male end thread, and then you have the female end thread. So this is the stock. This is the one, the Skunk2 one that's going in. Not torqued down at all, just a little bit more than hand tight, just to make sure everything stays in there. And now we're just gonna go around and pretty much do all the rest of these. Now that we've got our hardware in here, all we need to do is torque these down to 16 foot-pounds. So we're going to use our torque wrench, and you want to start from the center and move outwards. So if we label these sort of from front to back, if we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, ideally you're going to be starting at 4, then coming up to 3, doing 5, coming up to 2, doing 6, and then doing 1. Sort of just alternating, trying to go from the center and move forward 1, back 1, forward 1, back 1, that type of deal. So we're going to hit these with 16 foot-pounds. And there's 16. All right, that was basically the hardest part. Everything else should be relatively easy. The next thing we need to do is install our valve cover gasket. This is the gasket that goes all the way around the bottom and basically seals this onto the head of the engine. The part number is right there. This may just look like a big piece of black licorice, but there are actually 2 different sides to this. So there's kind of corners. So if you flip this around, so the front side has these little tabs on it. So the front side has a tab there and a little tab there, and then the back side actually has kind of a bit of a loop because of the fact that the valve cover has a bit of a loop. So let's see if we can't get this put in here. We've already got our spark plug little gaskets in. Those came with the valve cover installed, so that's very nice. Now that we've got our gasket in, we can throw it on the car. And now we can see how that Skunk2 hardware sits flush with the top of the valve cover. It's no longer sticking up and you have to have a little sort of dome nut to go on top. The hardware is going to sit nice and flush. Now that that's done, the next thing we need to do is basically reinstall our coil packs. I don't have the spark plugs in here yet, but I'm basically just going to be doing this for a demonstration for you guys. So we'll just go ahead and get one in there. Press that down, line up your hole with your bolt hole, and we'll get 2 in there. Press that down. Seals pretty nicely. Obviously, normally you would do all 4. I'm just going to be doing the first 2. So the next part that we need to do is basically get the hardware for these 2 bolts, as well as these 2 top bolts. One all the way back here, can't quite see it, but there are 2 different sets of hardware for this in the Skunk2 kit. Because of the fact that this is a lower mounting point and you're having to go through the whole thickness of the coil pack mount, the longer ones go here and here, and then these little shorter ones go here in the close one and the one all the way back there. And for reference, this is a 10mm bolt. and this is an 8mm bolt to be able to get these threaded in. We got an 8mm on the small one back here, 10mm on the larger one. Now, believe it or not, there is actually a torque spec for these, so all 4 of these bolts on top are going to get torqued down to 7 foot-pounds. Not very much. Basically, these are the parts, well, 1, these are holding your coil packs in place, but 2, these bolts, the only thing that they're going to be holding on is your spark plug cover, or your, I guess, ignition cover technically. So these don't have to be torqued, you know, no 10, 15, 20 foot-pounds at all. These are basically just going to be getting torqued down to 7 foot-pounds each. Again, those are 10mm bolts on the larger 2, and these are 8mm bolts on the smaller 2. Cool. All right, so really all of the sort of replacing of the old hardware is done. Now we're just going to kind of take a look at the washer system and how that works. I realized as I was filming this, and really as I got later into the video, that I made a mistake in what I told you guys earlier, that these were going in 2 and 3 in terms of like the cylinder banks. These are going in 2 and 4, not 2 and 3. And I found that out whenever I went to put on my spark plug cover, or my ignition cover, and I realized that this bolt hole wasn't lining up because I had put it in 2, or I had put that in 3 instead of putting that in 4. Just a little quick correction for you guys. At this point, we're going to start placing our Skunk2 washers in place. There's 6 of these larger ones for the larger bolts in the head that we replaced. So, you know, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way at the back. And so they give you an O-ring to go with every one of the washers. Now, they only give you 1 of these to match every washer, so try not to lose these. So just slip this right over, set our first one right on top. Yeah. With the washer in place, we're going to come back with our hardware, and with this kit there's actually 2 different pieces of hardware. Here you have the long ones, which go in these 6 for the large washers, and then the small ones will go in these inner bolts that we just installed. And for both of these bolts, the size on the tops of these are an H4 for an Allen key. Yeah, so see how flush that sits? You don't have that little dome nut on top. That looks sick, especially on the K-Tune valve cover. So now that we've got 1 of those, we're gonna come and do 5 more on the big washers. With all 6 of those in place, the torque specs for these are 3 foot-pounds, which is gonna be a bit low for the torque wrench that I have. So now we just need to do 1, 2, 3, and 4 for the actual ignition coil cover. For the smaller washers and their hardware, they don't actually have a stem that you can put the O-ring onto like the large washers did. So basically you'll just be taking this, placing this down onto the locations that it's going to be mounting, and then obviously taking the flat side of the washer, placing that down on top of the O-ring so that you have the lettering facing up, and then taking your smaller hardware, these are the smaller bolts compared to the larger bolts that went in there, obviously slip it down through there, tighten it down. And with all of that hardware back in place, I'm going to take my K-tuned dipstick built for the K24, drop it down in here. And here you have it. Here is what essentially it's going to look like, unless, you know, you block those off, or you're using these, or you keep these blocked off, or you're using that guy back there, whatever. God, this thing is so dirty. I have not torqued these bolts down because of the fact that this is going to come off and get replaced. But yeah, that just lines up with enough of a gap to show that beautiful K-tuned logo. And I've got K-tuned oil cap and the dipstick. As if you can't tell, I'm a shill for K-tuned products. They're just the best on the market. Let's take a look around this side. Yeah, so that hardware is nice and flush, nice and low profile. You know, I'm super stoked on that. That came out looking great. I love all of the little script on here. Whew. Man, that thing looks sweet. Just for a little sneak peek, let's put the intake manifold and the exhaust manifold and the turbo back on here, just to get a little idea of what this thing's gonna actually look like. Yo. Okay, to you guys it might not look all that different because my stock valve cover was red, so it's like, oh, it's basically the same. It looks pretty close. But man, obviously the big K-tuned logo, you all know I'm a shill for all K-tuned products. Like, oh, that looks so good. My overhead light just went off. And with the low profile hardware, dude. I could not be more happy with how this thing turned out. Obviously, it's gonna look different in terms of orientation if you're using this for a front wheel drive setup, but man, I'm telling you, K-tuned valve cover with the Skunk2 low profile hardware. You can get these in black or in silver. I, of course, went with black because that's really the whole theme of the car is red and black. And if you guys couldn't tell, I'm a pretty big fan of the color red. I didn't even notice this until I got started today. I was like, everything I'm wearing has red in it in some variation or another. But this thing, nice, brother. And that's gonna wrap it up for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found it helpful, and if you enjoyed the video, then smash that thumbs up button down below. Subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date on the build and get to see this thing run in about a month's time, hopefully. Fingers crossed, that's really what we're aiming for. And until next time, build your dreams.